Although I've never actually seen a Bigfoot, back in 2019, around springtime, I was driving a dump truck for a construction company here in Central Florida with another dump truck driver who did. We'll just call him John. Just call me Sam. We met early in the mornings, often as a group, to go ahead and get instructions about our workday. And John usually was with his smaller inner circle of trust, drivers who were good friends of his, talking about his weekends, travel trips he's gone on, and hunting trips as well. When we started the day, we all talked on the same CB company channel to communicate and coordinate our movements throughout the day, and our department manager guided us to what construction lots to work and pick up, and what lots to go in order to dump and such. We were very casual as far as talk and chit-chatter. The boss just didn't like us speaking profanities and such, but of course, every now and then, we did. One particular week, I saw John talking to his little inner circle in the morning. He looked really wide-eyed and serious. Something really got his goat. But I couldn't hear what it was. Of course, though, in a group of just about 50 to 60 drivers in the company, it would eventually get out. Truck drivers gossip worse than a sewing circle. That's just a fact. They can't keep secrets no matter how hard some of them try. It will get out, eventually. A couple of days go by. About midweek, we gathered one morning, and the boss man divided us up into our group assignments, and we, the largest group of 30 or so, drove the designated construction lot to pick up loads of dirt and clay. And of course, one of the loaders, of which were about 3 on this site usually, says on the CB, "Good morning, John. Heard you saw yourself a Bigfoot last weekend while you were hunting." Ha ha ha. That's Bubba for you. Big, loud, obnoxious, and straight to the point. Things got quiet for a moment on the CB. Crickets. And no doubt Bubba and the others were snickering to themselves. He got called out. After a long pause, John told the story. He and his brother was out hunting somewhere in Central Florida. I don't hunt myself, so I'm not familiar with the location of these places. And they happened upon a Bigfoot. It was still dark out, early wee hours of the morning still. I think they were heading to a tree stand to scope out some deer. Anyway, they were heading to their hunting site, and as they entered into a clearing, they saw across from them, I think about 80 to 100 or so feet away, was a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, a skunk ape, whatever you want to call it. Some natives call them steama. I found out after a couple of years of research, the Choctaw people, I believe, call them that. They both saw it, he and his brother. John and his brother just froze, you know. He said it was about 7 to 8 feet tall. It had a face that looked like a cross between a Neanderthal and an ape. Long arms down to its knees, broad shoulders. It was covered in reddish-brown hair. They all stared at each other for what seemed like forever. John says because he lost track of time as it seemed to stand still. It finally just turned away and walked into the tree line, disappearing. The usual encounter which I've heard on so many channels. As long as you're not violent, they usually are not. John said he about pissed himself a little bit, and said they were about able to unfreeze their legs. They hauled out of there, pronto. Ran some speed and walked some. I think he said a mile or so back to his truck. Of course, we mocked the hell out of him. Yeah, not cool, but we're truck drivers. What did he expect, you know? So, of course he had to defend himself. He had his brother there as a witness too, who could vouch for him, and of course, and some of the other guys wanted to hear from him also. Me, having so many supernatural experiences of my own, I felt he probably saw an apparition. Not a solid being, since part Cherokee. I've heard an interview with an old Cherokee chief that he believed Bigfoot was mostly a magical being, some type of elemental guardian. But after a couple of years of studying and hearing so many accounts, especially the accounts on your channel and others, I've become a believer in Bigfoot being flesh and blood. Although I have heard of supernatural experiences with Bigfoot, disappearing right in front of people in a flash of light, being beamed down into the woods by a UFO, and being able to talk telepathically, and even them having connections with and working with fairy folk. I wonder too if they are supernatural beings and shapeshifters who take their form for whatever their own purposes are. The best solid evidences, though, that I've seen of facts and tangible things like videos and footprints was brought out on Survivor Man, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I feel bad about mocking John, who, like many other people, have experienced things like that, and we're supposed to be friends. When someone is your friend, they deserve at least the benefit of the doubt, not ridicule. After he got past his fear, John was saying he and his brother plan to go back to try and gather evidence, like footprints and hair, possibly even having another sighting. He was very serious about it. I don't know what happened because I left a couple of months afterward for a higher paying job 30 miles north, closer to home. From there, well, I didn't know him well enough to get his information, but I do have a couple of numbers of friends from there. Maybe I'll try and get an update on John's Bigfoot incursions into the woods someday. But seriously, after what I've learned in the past couple of years, I believe he really did see something. These particular incidents, which occurred on my family property to me around towards the end of 2019 in Central Florida, when an unknown being that I can best describe as a very small impish-like thing, like a real gremlin or goblin, perhaps. I can't say for sure. There have always been strange occurrences on this property since I was a kid, back in the 80s, due to a happenstance and unpredictable things occurring in my life. I had to move back here, staying at my mother's house. One night, while sleeping, I heard something open the closet door and scamper out. It actually climbed up the steps to the top bunk bed and was jumping up and down on the bed, squeaking the top bunk. It was really dark in the room, and I couldn't see very well, but it was small like a child and sounded bipedal. This happened 3 separate times. I was pretty freaked out about it and went to a camper dealership, got a used camper, and dropped it 100 feet from the house and moved in. I did not even bother to mention it my mom, who was 80 years old at the time, and can be quite difficult about talking about things like that. Anyway, I thought that would be the end of the problem, or so I thought. With all the weirdness going on in the world, I decided to stock up on extra supplies over time, at least 3 months worth of non-perishables, dried goods and canned goods, in case I could not go grocery shopping for some reason. One day, I decided to go check on some goods that I stored in the storage compartment. There's 2 ways into this compartment, which is either to lift the bed or unlock the small side door on the camper. I had about 10 gallons of emergency water under there, and a large bag of dry dog food for my Maltese poodle, a gift from my mom. I discovered some damage. 2 of the best brands of galloned water, which I likened, had been broken into, or should I say bitten into, that I had bought from a local drugstore. I had 10 gallons total of different brands, but these 2 gallons I liked the best. The best way I can describe it is if you're holding the handle on the edges or corners to the right of the handle, and to the left, on the left corner, was a very small bite mark, about the size of a quarter. It looked like something very small, with very sharp teeth, bit a quarter-sized chunk out of the side of that bottle, and the other bottle of the same brand also. Whatever did this had drunk at least half the 2 gallons. The jugs were partially squeezed and collapsed on top with too much force. This was no accident. Something did this. It also seemed like whatever did this either spit or blew small spatterings of this sticky brownish snot or spittle all over the other gallon jugs of water, but never damaged any of them. The dog food, too, had at least a half a dozen bite marks like that into the bag, and was eaten into, each hole apparently. After I saw this, I cleaned up the mess and thoroughly checked that entire compartment from side, and I lifted the bed and did a pretty thorough search all the way to the back compartment. There was absolutely, positively, no way for anything to get into there. No holes, no nothing. No bugs or critters or anything in there, at least that could do that. I checked 3 times over. My camper is a good couple of feet off the ground, over just dirt. No brush or anything. There was no visible way in. I must admit, though, on occasion, I woke up in the middle of the night, about 3 a.m. or so, to hear like something knocking around in there. Over the previous week, of course. And one night, I woke up to something running across the roof. It sounded bipedal and small. It sounded like something was messing with my air conditioner. After it leapt off the roof, the AC made this irritating rattle sound, and it resonated through the camper, making it hard to sleep. I kept having to clean black mold out of it too very often after that. These sounds would happen always at night, and I'd wake up in that Twilight Zone kind of stupor. But eventually, it would quiet down, and I'd fall back asleep. One night stood out in particular when I woke to hearing knocking under the bed. I distinctly heard a loud, muffled hello. I heard something say that under my bed. It sounded like a child with a high-pitched voice trying to imitate Seinfeld from the Hello episode. I jumped out of the bed, ran into the kitchen area of the camper. Safe to say, I stayed up until sun. I was freaked out. I sat up all night thinking, what was this? Eventually, the daytime came and I gathered up enough courage to go back there and check under, but found absolutely nothing wrong. I checked the side door again and there was no way in or out. It was locked. Time passed and everything had quieted down for a couple of weeks, besides the occasional nightmare, which always happens to me on this property. But other than that, no real creepy incidents. One evening, I went for a walk, got lost in thought for a while and lost track of time, when I realized I waited too long to go shower and hit the bed. Sunset fast approached, since this time of year, sunsets usually happen about 5:30, maybe 6 in late December. It took me a while to make it from the back property up towards my camper. It was getting pretty dark by the time I made it back, and plus it was cloudy. There is a storage shed by the rear of my camper, and also a tent shed next to it that houses the farm tractor, and a small gap in between them. It's kind of like a little dark alley. As I passed the little alley, I heard a low-sounding, high-pitched, demonic-sounding snickering. I looked and saw a shadow of something I could not see clearly. It was so dark in that spot, but it was maybe 1 to 2 feet in height, and had the outline of a pointed-ear gremlin head and body, type goblin, or whatever you want to call it. All I can say is that in that second or two this occurred, I got chills, freaked out, ran to my camper door, slamming the door behind me, and locking it. I should have known better than to stay out this late, on this old creepy property, because my experiences here as a kid, I'll never forget them. You can't just go out walking late, not after dark. As time went by, I did a little checking on the net and YouTube and other sites. I found some explanations from a Native American woman who is also an archaeologist and has lots of knowledge on the paranormal. And she said beings like that do exist in usually small groups, but can and do act alone and exist in homes or near heavily forested areas, which there is one near my camper. The Choctaw lady has talked about fairies, elves, gnomes, gremlins, and other types of nasty little beings like pugwudgies, brownies, stick Indians, etc., etc. All that can go invisible and go spiritual, walking through walls and going back solid again to eat or drink or affect things in the environment around them. She also knows a lot about dogman and bigfoot and many other kinds of cryptids. I don't know. This kind of stuff on where I live makes me nauseous at times, makes my brain sore, but I have to learn to deal with it until I can do better and hopefully move far away from here. But for now, all I can do is pray I don't see that thing again. I really don't want to. I don't need a heart attack at nearly 50 years of age. I've still got plenty of life to live. Amazing how something so small can be so ridiculously scary.